There's something about being underestimated that either crushes you or carves you into something unstoppable. He thought you'd break. When he left, when he chose silence instead of explanation, when he assumed your world would collapse quietly behind a locked door, he didn't realize he wasn't walking away from weakness. He was walking away from a woman who hadn't even begun to discover her strength. Because here's the truth, nobody tells you. Sometimes the deepest betrayal isn't when someone leaves, it's when they expect you not to survive it. He thought you'd fall apart, cry quietly, beg. He thought his absence would echo louder than your presence. But you did something radical. You didn't chase. You didn't crumble. You didn't post quotes for him to see. You became the quote. You turned your pain into practice. You built habits instead of hunting closure. You found beauty not in getting them back, but in getting yourself back, and that scares people. People don't fear your sadness. They fear your growth. Because the version of you they broke was easy to leave, but this version is unrecognizable and unforgettable. Now here you are, not broken, not bitter, just better. So if you're ever tempted to ask, why didn't he choose me? Remember, he didn't choose the old you, and that's his loss. Because the new you, she doesn't just survive, she shines. And to anyone who ever thought you'd break, tell them one thing. Watch this. That's the part they never calculate correctly. When someone hurts you, when they leave, betray, dismiss, or try to diminish you, they often do it with the quiet confidence that you'll shrink, that you'll fall silent, that you'll disappear into the background, licking your wounds, doubting your worth, quietly nursing your heartbreak while they move on with their life, unbothered. That's what they count on, not because you're weak, but because they assume you don't know your own strength yet. They expect the version of you they saw last, the one who tolerated too much, the one who questioned herself every time she wasn't enough for them, the one who stayed up trying to make sense of why things fell apart when you gave your best. They remember the confused you, the forgiving you, the one still hoping for a different ending. And so when they exit, they assume that's the version of you that remains. They don't expect what happens next. They don't expect the fire that comes from being left in the cold. They don't expect you to stop waiting, to stop wishing, to stop looking back. They don't expect you to wake up one day and say, I'm done making excuses for someone who never showed up for me. They don't expect you to invest that energy back into yourself, into your healing, your body, your career, your circle, into the parts of you that were put on pause because you were so busy trying to make something work with someone who wasn't even trying. They don't expect the glow up, not just the kind people see, the kind you feel, the calm that replaces the anxiety, the clarity that replaces the chaos, the purpose that grows from pain. They expected your silence because that's what people with limited vision do. They assume that if they can't see your future, it must not exist. They think if they walk out, the story ends. They think they're the climax in your narrative, the chapter you'll never move on from. They believe their absence is too powerful for you to overcome. But that's the twist they never see coming. You didn't just come back, you came back different, wiser, sharper, softer in the right places, stronger in the right places. You stopped trying to be chosen, and you started choosing yourself. You stopped waiting for an apology, and you gave yourself closure. You stopped trying to get back what you lost, and you started protecting what you've gained. And let's be honest, that version of you, the one who learned how to rise without revenge, who found peace without their permission, who rebuilt with no audience clapping for every step, that version is unshakable. Because silence, that was never your weakness, it was your setup. The silence gave you space to hear your own voice again, to hear your instincts that you'd silenced for too long, to hear your own needs and realize they were never too much, they were just too real for someone not ready to meet them. Your comeback wasn't loud, dramatic, or fueled by bitterness. It was rooted in self-respect. It was slow and sometimes lonely, but it was honest. And that kind of growth, it's magnetic. You don't have to announce it. People feel it. Even the ones who walked away, especially them, they'll notice. They always do. Not because you went back to prove a point, but because you moved forward with nothing to prove. They'll see the new light in your eyes, the confidence in your posture, the quiet no where there used to be hesitation, the boundaries, the focus, the freedom, and maybe they'll reach out, maybe they won't, but that's not the point. The point is, they expected your silence, not your comeback. They expected you to disappear, not evolve, to stay small, not expand, to break, not rebuild. And every time you show up for yourself now, in the way you speak, the way you walk, the way you carry your standards, the way you protect your peace, you remind the world, and yourself, you are not to be underestimated. You were never fragile, you were just unfolding. It felt like the end, didn't it? That moment when everything cracked, when the words you feared most were finally said, or worse, left unsaid, when the silence came louder than any argument ever could, when you stared at your phone, hoping it would light up, hoping the apology would come, the explanation, the "I didn't mean to hurt you," the comeback, but it didn't. All you were left with was a version of reality you didn't ask for. A heart still trying to make sense of how love could unravel so fast, how someone who once claimed to care could disappear without a trace, or worse, stay and become distant, cold, unrecognizable. In that moment, you thought something broke. Maybe it was your heart, maybe it was your trust, maybe it was the picture you had painted so vividly in your mind, the future, the plans, the quiet certainty that this time, this one, was going to stay. And when that illusion shattered, it felt final, like something essential was taken from you, like you'd never fully return to who you were before it all. That's what a break feels like. Sharp, sudden, irreversible. But here's the truth hidden beneath the ache. The break wasn't your ending, it was the bend. Because what if the pain didn't come to destroy you, but to redirect you? What if what you called heartbreak was actually your life shifting its alignment, recalibrating your direction, so you wouldn't keep pouring yourself into something that had no capacity to hold you? What if the very thing you thought would ruin you was actually the moment that rerouted you towards something better, a stronger you, a wiser you, a more intentional life? See, a bend doesn't mean collapse. It means change. It means the path you were on isn't a straight line anymore. But whoever said the best paths were straight? Some of the most breathtaking views come after the toughest climbs and the sharpest turns. You bend because you are flexible. You bend because you are still in motion. Breaking feels final. Bending means you're still in the story. That relationship that ended, that job that fell through, that dream that didn't unfold the way you pictured, they weren't punishments, they were pivots. They were your life whispering, "This isn't your destination. This is just a detour." But when we're deep in it, we don't see the bigger picture. We only see what's missing. We mourn the plan we had. We resist the new direction because it wasn't the one we chose. But if you look back, you'll notice something. Every time you thought it was over, you were actually being shaped. Those moments of bending didn't break you. They stretched you. They grew your emotional muscles. They made you more resilient, more empathetic, more alert to red flags, more clear about what you deserve. The version of you standing here today didn't arrive without scars, but those scars are maps. They tell the story of where you've been and how far you've come. And isn't that the most powerful thing? That you thought you couldn't survive it, but here you are, still breathing, still healing, still being. You found laughter again, maybe not right away, but eventually you found peace in your own company. You started to like the sound of your own thoughts again. You realized that just because someone walked away doesn't mean you were unworthy. It just means they weren't your destination. They were your redirection. So now, when life bends you, you don't resist it the way you used to. You don't panic. You breathe. You listen. You trust that this too has something to teach you. You stop gripping so tightly to what was and begin to open your hands to what could be. Because you've learned by now, you're not as fragile as you once believed. You're made of something much stronger. You're not glass, you're bamboo. You bend, you don't break. And maybe one day, the same path that hurt you will become the path that frees you. Maybe you'll look back on this very moment and say, "That was it. That was the bend that saved me." Not because you were too much, too emotional, too intense, or too complicated, but because you were evolving. Quietly, consistently, in ways they could feel, even if they couldn't name it. You were asking deeper questions, demanding more honesty from them and from yourself. You were healing patterns, setting boundaries, learning to say no without guilt, and yes without apology. And somewhere along the way, that started to unsettle them, because not everyone claps for your evolution. Not everyone is ready to meet the version of you that stops making yourself small just to keep the peace. Growth has a way of pulling things to the surface, the truth about who's really for you, and who was only ever comfortable with the version of you who didn't know her worth yet. And for some people, that truth is too much. They don't know how to stay once you start seeing yourself clearly. Maybe they were drawn to your softness, the way you gave without asking, how you carried their weight without complaint, how you made space for their insecurities without ever demanding they grow past them. Maybe you were the one who bent first, the one who compromised, who forgave quickly, who lowered your standards thinking that's what love was. And for a while, that worked. But then something shifted. You started to choose yourself. You stopped justifying their bad behavior. You stopped confusing potential with partnership. You looked at the dynamic and saw the imbalance. You started seeing the cracks, not just in them but in the way you abandoned yourself to hold it all together. And once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. That's when the distance began. Subtle, at first. A little less warmth. A little more defensiveness. Maybe they accused you of changing, and you had. But not in the way they claimed. You didn't become cold. You became clear. You stopped trying to be understood by someone who wasn't even trying to understand themselves. You stopped watering dead plants. You stopped apologizing for having needs. And that clarity threatened them, because it exposed the gap between who they were willing to be and who you were becoming. Some people aren't scared of losing you. They're scared of having to grow to keep you. And when faced with the choice between rising to meet you or retreating to where it's comfortable, they choose comfort, not because you weren't worth the effort, but because they weren't willing to do the work. They didn't leave because you were hard to love. They left because loving you now required more. It required presence, accountability, maturity, emotional labor. It required the kind of intimacy that isn't just physical or convenient, the kind that's vulnerable, confronting, and deeply honest. And not everyone is built for that. Some people prefer connections that don't demand growth, that don't hold a mirror up, that don't say, this is where it hurts, and this is how we can heal it together. But you were never meant to shrink to be loved. You were meant to expand and be met in that expansion. You were meant to be in spaces where your growth is not a threat, but an invitation, an inspiration, a reflection of what's possible. And if someone couldn't stay as you stepped into your power, it says more about their capacity than your value. They left because your light got brighter, and they weren't ready to stop hiding in the dark. They left because your voice got stronger, and it made their silence harder to justify. They left because you started loving yourself out loud, and it made the way they loved you look small. They left not because you were too much, but because you finally stopped pretending to be less. And maybe that hurts. Of course it does. You wanted them to rise with you. You believed they could. But their absence is not your failure. It's just proof that your growth was real, that it challenged something stagnant, that it disrupted a dynamic that could no longer contain the truth of who you are becoming. Your growth terrified them, and that's exactly why you needed to grow. They thought they knew you, thought they had you figured out. The version of you they met was real, yes, but it wasn't the final version. It was the version still learning, still accommodating, still silencing herself in subtle ways, just to keep things smooth, to keep things close, to avoid conflict, to maintain the illusion of harmony. It was the version of you that second-guessed her gut, that played small in moments that needed her to stand tall. It was the version that thought love had to be earned, that being chosen was a prize, that worth could be negotiated in how much you could give, without asking for anything back. And they liked that version of you, not because she was weak, but because she was easier to manage, easier to predict. She made space for their comfort. She was understanding when she should have been drawing a line. She said it's okay when it wasn't. She saw their wounds and tried to heal them, even when they bled all over her. She was more focused on keeping them than keeping herself, and that worked for them. But something changed. It didn't happen overnight. There wasn't some dramatic moment, just a slow, quiet unraveling, a growing awareness, a shift. One day you stopped explaining yourself so much, stopped apologizing for how deeply you feel, for how much you ask, for the fact that you require presence, honesty, effort. You stopped being afraid of what would happen if you asked for more. You realized that if asking for more made someone leave, they were never planning on staying in the way you needed anyway. And that was the beginning of your becoming. You started paying attention to how your body felt around certain people, not just what they said. You started listening to your own voice again, the one that had been buried under so much noise. You learned the difference between someone who wants you and someone who values you, between attraction and alignment, between someone needing you and someone choosing you. You saw where you were giving too much, where you were over-functioning, where you were hoping love would change someone who had no interest in changing at all. They didn't see that person coming. They didn't see the version of you who would outgrow the dynamic they were comfortable in. They didn't see the version who would stop chasing, stop fixing, stop filling in the gaps for both people. They didn't expect the silence, the calm, grounded silence that came when you stopped reacting to their inconsistency. They didn't expect you to stop answering messages that only came when they were bored or lonely. They didn't expect you to stop explaining why you were hurt, because you finally realized that people who care don't need to be convinced. You became the person who knew her value, who set standards without apology, who spoke clearly about what she wants and doesn't fold when someone says, "That's too much." You became the kind of woman who doesn't beg for clarity, who walks away from breadcrumbs, who understands that love is not about proving your worth. It's about sharing it with someone who already sees it. And yes, it confused them, maybe even angered them. People get frustrated when the version of you they were comfortable manipulating, neglecting, or misunderstanding no longer exists. When the dynamics shift and the power they never should have had slips away. When you no longer seek their validation to feel whole. When your glow isn't about them anymore. It's about you, rooted, present, awake. They didn't see this you coming, the you who doesn't chase closure, because she realizes silence was the answer. The you who no longer keeps doors cracked open for people who walked away. The you who reclaims her energy and reinvests it where it grows. The you who stopped waiting to be saved and decided to become her own rescue. You became the person they never expected because they were looking at who you were, not who you were becoming. And that's their mistake. They underestimated your ability to evolve. They thought you'd stay in the version that was easy to love, because she hadn't learned to love herself yet. But you did. You learned. You changed. You rose. You became. And now the very energy they took for granted is the one they'll miss most. Not because you disappeared, but because you finally showed up as someone they can't reach anymore. There's a fire that comes after being doubted, after being dismissed, after someone looks at you, all that you are, all that you give, and decides you're not enough, or worse, that you're too much. After someone walks away like you were replaceable, like your heart was just another stop along their way. And in the aftermath, it's tempting to make your growth a performance, to make your healing about showing them what they lost, to make your progress a stage where the goal is to be seen by the very people who never really saw you. But the truth is, that kind of rebuilding doesn't last, because the moment they look away, you lose your reason, and you deserve better than that. Rebuilding should never be rooted in revenge. That's not where your power is. Your power is in reclaiming yourself for you, not for the audience, not for the ex, not for the people who doubted you, but for the version of you who always believed there was more. The version who stayed up at night, wondering if she was asking for too much, when really, she was asking for the bare minimum. The version who shrank to make others comfortable, who twisted herself to fit a narrative that was never written for her, who held on to people who let go long before she did. That's who you rebuild for, to show her she wasn't wrong to hope, she wasn't wrong to try. And most importantly, she's not wrong now to want more. Because deep down, you always knew. You knew you were capable of more than just surviving. You knew you had depth, strength, softness, grit. You knew you were built for connection, for impact, for growth. And when things broke, the relationship, the plan, the dream, it wasn't your instincts that failed you. It was just a chapter ending so a better one could begin. But that kind of shift takes courage. It takes unlearning. It takes silence. It takes facing the parts of yourself you ignored while trying to be loved. It takes choosing to build something real, even when no one's watching. That's what it means to rebuild for yourself. To wake up and decide that your peace matters. That your joy doesn't need to be validated to be real. That you are allowed to be proud of yourself without needing someone else to clap for you. That you don't need them to regret leaving to believe you were worthy of staying full. That the value of your heart isn't determined by who holds it, but by how you protect it now. When you rebuild from that place, everything changes. You don't move out of spite. You move out of vision. You stop being reactive and start becoming intentional. You choose the people who choose you, not the ones you have to convince. You speak with conviction, not fear. You love with wisdom, not desperation. You build routines, relationships, boundaries and dreams that reflect who you're becoming, not who you were trying to be for someone else. You stop asking, will they see me now? And start asking, do I see me now? Because that's the shift. When your rebuild is no longer about being seen, but about being whole, about being rooted, about looking in the mirror and knowing you didn't take the easy way out. You faced it. You stayed when it was hard. You showed up for yourself, even when no one else did. And that is proof, not to them, but to you. Proof that your softness wasn't a weakness, that your standards weren't too high, that your heart wasn't foolish for loving, or brave for leaving, that every breakdown you survived didn't make you bitter, it made you real, that your intuition was guiding you all along, that your spirit can't be broken by people who were never strong enough to hold it in the first place. So rebuild slowly, quietly, without the need for applause, with steady hands and a clear mind. Rebuild because you are worth the version of your life that doesn't just look good, but feels good. Rebuild because you finally believe the voice inside you that's been whispering all along. You were never asking for too much. You were just asking in the wrong direction. Rebuild because it's time to stop proving them wrong and start proving yourself right. So here you are, not broken, but rebuilt. Not smaller from the pain, but expanded by it. Everything you've been through wasn't just survival, it was transformation. Every time someone left, doubted you, or underestimated your worth, they handed you an opportunity, not to fight for their approval, but to fight for your truth. You didn't become the person they expected. You became the version of yourself that you always had the potential to be. And that was never about revenge. It was about recognition, your own. You've stopped chasing closure from people who were never ready for your depth. You've stopped performing healing and actually started living it. You no longer measure your progress by who claps. You measure it by your peace, your boundaries, your clarity, your ability to say no without guilt, and yes without fear. That is your power. That is your proof. This journey was never about proving them wrong. It was about proving yourself right. That your love, your light, your standards, your heart were never too much. They were just too rare. And now, you get to rebuild not from pain, but from purpose. You didn't just survive. You became someone they never saw coming.